Can you get quality tools from the infamous Harbor Freight? Well, I just bought 7 of their most viral tools available, so let's see if any of them live up to the hype. As somebody who has to drive by 4 Home Depots and Lowe's to get to a Harbor Freight, I don't do a whole lot of shopping there, so it takes a lot of hype to get me to visit. But that's exactly what's happening for today's video, as I just purchased 7 tools that are going viral on YouTube. So I thought I'd see what all the talk's about and see if any of these tools are dope or if they're all just a joke. So let's get into it and talk about my first item, which I got for my table saw. Hey cuz, I need to get a new table saw. Mine's been acting up on me. Any specific model you have in mind? Megan Fox, of course, but what's that got to do with a table saw? Never mind. Let's get into our first tool. So the tool in this box is the item that initiated this entire video. And that's because everybody seems to be talking about this affordable option for your table saw on YouTube. So I meandered all the way over to Harbor Freight, eagerly anticipating purchasing this tool, only to find out they were completely sold out, even though their website said they were available and in stock. So my first lesson learned with Harbor Freight is it may be worth a call, as it appears that their website doesn't talk to their store inventory. So I had to order this online and pay shipping, which is unfortunate, but let's tear into this box and see what we got. This is the Bauer 24 3/4 fence and miter gauge. Let's get it out of the box and check it out. So one of the main selling points for this miter gauge is the price. At today's prices, this thing costs $44.99, which is a heck of a lot cheaper than some of your higher end ones. Specifically, the one that I have is the Craig, and it comes in at $159 today. So let's see how this Bauer compares to the Craig and see what comes inside the box. My first impressions with this miter gauge are pretty positive, as it looks like most of the pieces are made of metal and it looks fairly easy to assemble. And you can see the major pieces to this miter gauge are the miter gauge itself, a fence, a stop block, as well as a handle. And the assembly is really pretty easy. The first step is to take the handle and a washer and place it right into the miter gauge. With the handle now in place, you'll now take 2 of the bolts and washers and place them right through the miter gauge and attach the smaller handles. With those 2 bolts in place, you can now take your fence and slide it onto those bolts through the T-track. Now you'll take your larger fence extension lock knob and bracket and slide it right into the back of that miter gauge fence. After that, we can install the stop block by sliding it into the top of the miter gauge fence. And the last step is to quickly add an end cap to each side of the fence. And that basically covers the entire assembly of this miter gauge. So let's take it over to the table saw and take a look at some of its features. So one of the first things that we'll do is we'll slide the miter gauge into the miter slot. Now if there's any slop with the miter gauge and the miter slot, you can tighten down that miter gauge by one of the 3 screws on the miter bar. And for my miter gauge, it just took a couple of turns with the included Allen key to get this thing rock solid in that miter slot. With the miter gauge in place, the first thing that I like to do is to set the fence about 1 inch away from the blade. With that fence distance set, you can now lock it into place with the 2 red knobs on the back of the miter gauge. Now one of the first things that you'll notice with this miter gauge is its stop block, and this looks very similar to my Craig. Now this fence doesn't have the ability to do any micro adjustments on it, but frankly neither does my Craig. Now let's take a look at how that adjustable fence works. If we extend that fence out, you'll see that there's 2 bars that connect the extension to the actual fence. The extension is locked into place with a bracket that simply pins the 2 bars into the T-track. And you can even transfer the stop block onto the extension for your wider cuts. If we extend that fence all the way out, you can see that we're getting just under 25 inches of capacity. Now one thing to consider is there is a little bit of play back and forth once that fence is fully extended. But honestly, when we compare it to the Craig at its full extension, it's really not that much different. The only thing that I really prefer with the Craig over the Bauer so far are the markings on the very top of the Craig. Lastly, when we pull that fence back, the collapsed fence is 14 3/4 of an inch long. Now let's take a look at the angles that are available with this gauge. If we look at the gauge, you can see it goes from 0 to 74 degrees in either direction. Now even though it's labeled for 74 degrees in each direction, you can really only get about 70. And my guess is you're really not going to be cutting at that steep of an angle anyway. You probably noticed those little notches or detents alongside those angles. Let's talk about those. These allow you to quickly hit some of those most commonly used angles, including 0, 15, 22.5, 30, 45, and 60 degrees. Simply loosen up the red knob on the back, pull back on the slat, and slide it into one of those detents. Now I know some people have complained that that latch is a little bit difficult to pull back, but frankly I think a little bit resistance is needed. Now, if you have a unique angle that you'd like to cut that's not represented by those detents, this gauge can handle that as well. By using the red crosshair, you can hit any angle you'd like and tighten it down with the handle by twisting it to the left. Now, obviously, I'm using this on a cabinet saw, but this thing works just as well on a job site saw. And in fact, with its smaller stature, I think it's a better option for these job site table saws versus the Kreg. The last thing that I want to talk about before we do a couple of test cuts with the Bauer is the length of the miter bar. The miter bar length of the Bauer in front of the fence is fairly small, coming in at 11.5 inches, versus the Kreg, which comes in at almost 16 inches long. And my main purpose for bringing this up is this can cause some stability issues when cross-cutting wider pieces of wood. So let's test this thing out and see if it's accurate enough for a woodworking shop. First up, I want to see if it's 90 degrees right out of the box in that detent. And surprisingly, I'm not seeing any material difference between the blade and the fence itself. But let's cross-cut a piece of plywood and see if that comes out at 90. And if I take my piece of plywood and place a woodpecker square right up against the edge and place a flashlight behind it, I'm not seeing any light behind that square. Now let's do a 45-degree angle on the opposite side with a detent at 45. And once again, that's right on at 45 degrees. Now I know a couple other channels that I respect have gotten some different results with the detents on their gauge. But I can only share the results that I've gotten from the one that I purchased, and I think it's good to get different perspectives. Well, I have to admit, I think this one's pretty dope, but we've got a couple more tools to take a look at. Specifically, our next tool is from Pittsburgh. You know, they sell a lot of Pittsburgh stuff over there. Yeah, the Harbor Freight near me got robbed blind. They're calling the culprits the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is a tool that they actually had in stock, so I bought 2 of them. These are 2 Pittsburgh quick clamps with quick release. Let's check them out. So the thing that sold me with these clamps are 2 words, quick and release. If we take a quick look at the clamp, you can see it's got a pretty unique design. The first thing that catches my eye about these clamps are the 2 orange tabs on the side, and these are the quick release buttons. By simply depressing one of these orange tabs, you can easily move the jaw of the clamp forward or backwards, saving you time and effort versus manually screwing those clamps tight. Now the body and jaws are made out of aluminum, but there are a couple plastic pieces on these clamps that I'm not too fond of. The first item is the handle, which is hollow and triangular shape and not necessarily that comfortable. The second plastic piece is the push button for the quick release. These are also made out of plastic and they feel like they could crack or break off. If we look at the capacity of the clamp, you can see it's fairly large, coming in at 2 5/8 of an inch. And the height of the jaw is a little smaller, coming in at 1 inch exactly. Now let me tell you the best part about these clamps, and that is the price, as each one of these clamps is less than 12 bucks. And the most comparable corner clamps that I have to this design are my wet holes, and these are my favorite corner clamps. But there's one problem though, these SOBs cost $36.99 a pop. And although the wet holes is a great clamp, I feel like I'll have a little bit more control with that Pittsburgh given the 2 handles. And because of this clamp's functionality and the price, I can understand the hype. Well, that's 2 dope viral tools from Harbor Freight so far. Let's see what our next tool is. Now our next item is also a clamp, but not any ordinary clamp, it's a parallel clamp. You know, I got a picture of both my ex-wives standing straight and narrow right next to each other at my nephew's hog show. Yeah, I got that picture hanging right next to my clamps in my shop. That way I can have my parallel clamps right next to my parallel tramps. So these are the viral Bremen parallel clamps that you see everybody talking about on YouTube. Now if you don't have parallel clamps in your shop, I would highly recommend them. The problem is parallel clamps are expensive, especially if you're buying higher end brands like Jorgensen and Bessie. In fact, to get the same length in Jorgensen, you're going to be paying about $174 for 2, while Bessie goes for about $52 a clamp. And this 48-inch parallel clamp from Bremen is considerably cheaper, coming in at $38.99. So let me take one of these Bremen clamps out of their packaging so that we can take a look at some of their features. Now obviously I bought 2 of these because the price was so good, but unfortunately after unwrapping my first one I can already tell I have to return one. And that's simply because one of these clamps already has a bent bar. Now I probably should have realized this before I purchased it, but I'm going to go ahead and return this. But let's look past that and take a look at the other one. Now, one of my first impressions with these clamps is they're pretty heavy, having a shipping weight of 8.7 pounds. If we look at the jaws of these clamps, you can see they're very similar to any other parallel clamp, having a throat depth of 3 3/4 of an inch and a throat width of about 2 inches. Now, these Bremen clamps are listed as having a 48-inch capacity, but if we measure it out, you can see it's about 48.5. If we look at the handle of the clamp, you can see it's got a nice soft rubber grip that's very comparable to any other high-end clamp. Each clamp also comes with 2 removable support brackets as well as a removable end foot. And that removable end foot allows you to easily convert these parallel clamps to spreaders without any tools. And just like those high-end clamps, these clamps have a clamping force of up to 1,300 pounds. And with these clamps' resin body construction, you can be assured that wood glue won't stick to them. So are these Bremen clamps worth all the hype? Well, I'm kind of indifferent. Sure, the price is right and they have all the features you'd want on a parallel clamp, but I can't overlook the fact that one of the bars on these clamps was bent. So I don't think these clamps are a joke, but I also don't think they're quite dope. So I'm going to hang one of these clamps up and return the other and report back in a couple of months. Well, that takes us through 3 items so far today and 4 more left to take a look at. Before we move on to our 4th, I ask you to do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment, as it really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, if you haven't already, do me a favor and check out my website, flynndogwoodwork.com. There you can find all sorts of fun woodworking accessories like all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. Lastly, if any of the tools we're taking a look at today interest you, I'll leave links in the description below so that you can go check them out for yourself. Now let's get on to our next tool. Well, maybe it's not exactly a tool, but it is a necessary shop accessory, and that is the good old-fashioned shop towel. You know, that reminds me of my brother Cooter. He's on the run after escaping prison. He has to disguise himself now by wrapping his head with paper towels. I'm pretty sure they'll catch him though because he's got a bounty on his head. So for years, I've been using these professional white rags that are available at Home Depot. But for the last year or so, they just haven't had these in stock. And frankly, these towels have their issues, especially in my shop, as I'm constantly pulling walnuts out of the top of these towels. Now, yes, I do have a squirrel problem in my barn, and I've even thought about creating a dispenser to store these towels upside down. But this next viral Harbor Freight item solves all that. These are the Toolbox Blue Shop Towels. Now, it's not necessarily the towels that interest me so much as it is the Big Grip Dispenser. This dispenser comes with everything you need to not only hold your towels upside down, but also vertically. And that's because not only does it come with a dispenser to hold your towels, but it also comes with a mounting bracket and screws to mount the mounting bracket. Simply take the included 3 screws and attach your mounting bracket to the wall, or in my case, the post to my bench. Then you can take your dispensers and with its little notches on the handle, it slides right into that mounting bracket. And with the dispenser's resealable flip-top lid, you can access all the towels you need right underneath that canister. And each refillable roll comes with 200 sheets and is made from 60% recyclable material and is the same size and has the same durability as many of your major brands. And it's because of this canister and mounting bracket that I can totally understand why this thing is going viral. And I have no problem calling this Harbor Freight accessory dope. Now let's check out our next item. So if I were to ask you what tool goes missing in your shop the most, what would you say? Tape measure? Your favorite hammer? Or maybe it's that dust collection remote. Those are all great answers, but I think there's one wrench that most people are missing, and that's the 10mm wrench or socket. I lost my 10mm socket in my 3rd divorce. I only got a 5mm now. She took half. Since the 10mm socket size is one of the most commonly used sizes, it can oftentimes go missing. So Pittsburgh Tools took notice of this, and they developed this viral socket set, the 10mm socket set. This 10-piece 10mm set could be the perfect way to replace some of those sockets that are missing in your shop. And this set has a nice mix of sockets for your 3 most common drivers, including a 1/4-inch drive for a shallow impact, shallow, flex, and deep socket. Not only that, but it's also got those same 4 10mm sockets for a 3/8-inch driver as well. And the last 2 sockets are for a 1/2-inch drive, and they include a shallow and deep socket. And this set even includes a socket rail for convenient storage so that you don't lose those 10mm again. So if you're like me and you tend to lose these things in your shop, this could be a great replacement to get you back in business. And at a price of just under $15, I can totally understand why this product went viral. As missing sockets are no joke in my shop, and I think these things are pretty dope. Well, for our next Harbor Freight viral tool, we're going to go back to clamps. Boy, I tell you, all this talk about clamps reminds me of my mom during Easter. All of my clamps would go up missing. She would be so happy that she would clamp her hams. Well, we may not be clamping any hams with these clamps, but hopefully after taking a look at them, we'll be clapping our hands. My favorite classic clamp that I have in my shop is my 12-inch wooden screw clamp from Bessie. The problem is, even though this is a low-tech clamp, it has a high-tech price, coming in at $32 for just one clamp. And these clamps really aren't that complicated, so when I saw they were selling one at Harbor Freight for under $7, I thought I'd check it out. This is the Pittsburgh 12-inch wooden screw clamp. Let's see how it compares to that Bessie. Now let's take this new clamp and place it right on top of that Bessie to see if we can see any differences. Now I don't know about you, but these clamps appear to be identical. Now you may have noticed that round hole in the Bessie, but that's a modification that I made to convert this clamp to a caul. If we look at the Pittsburgh clamp, you can see it's got the exact same clamp capacity as the Bessie at 6 inches long. And the jaws of the clamp are able to open just as much as that Bessie at about 8 inches. And with all of the relative dimensions between the two clamps being identical, I really don't see the point in spending more money for the Bessie. And with the jaws of the Pittsburgh being made out of hardwood, just like the Bessie, you really can't go wrong with this clamp. Whether you're using the clamp to hold things down, hold things up, or even as a temporary vise. And at 20% of the cost of those Bessies, I can completely understand why these things have gone viral, as these are an absolutely dope deal. Well, it's hard to believe it, but we're finally down to our last Harbor Freight viral tool. And this one is all about a simple magnet. You know, I was a chick magnet my first 2 years in high school. Everything was great until that summer the fair came to town. I got on that Ferris wheel and I couldn't get off for the last 2 years. You see, magnets are one of those things that you really just can't mess up. And I just recently converted a high-end one into bit storage over at my drill press. And that thing wasn't cheap. It's 24 inches long and cost over 30 bucks. So when I saw a video showing that Harbor Freight sells these things for 15 to 20% of the cost, I knew I needed to give it a try. And judging how hard it was to get it off the metal rack at Harbor Freight, I think this thing's going to work. This is the 18-inch US General magnetic holder. Let's get it out of the box and see how it compares to some of those higher end ones. Now this is the most inexpensive item we've taken a look at today, coming in at $4.99. Now the reason that I got this magnet is I thought it would be a great item to hang right above my router table. I have a bad habit of storing my wrenches and other router accessories right behind the fence of my router table. So I thought, why not take this magnet, mount it right behind my router table, and get all those items off the table and onto this magnet. But I want to make sure this magnet is strong enough before I mount it onto my wall. So let's take this magnet and load it up with wrenches, accessories, and even a few bits. Now with everything loaded up, the question is this magnet strong enough to be mounted to my wall? And after giving it a few swift shakes for a while, I'm happy to say this thing can get mounted to my wall. Well, I totally get the hype on this one. At just $5, you really can't beat this shop organization tool. Heck, this thing's so dope I can even put a 10mm wrench on it. Well, I hope you had fun with me today checking out these 7 viral Harbor Freight tools. I'll have to say I'm quite pleased with the results of almost every single tool we've taken a look at today. If you know of any other great Harbor Freight tools, leave a comment below and let us all know. I'd love to take a look at them. Well, thanks so much again for joining me today. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, and share this video, as it really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, if you haven't already, check out my website, flynndoggwoodwork.com. There you can find all sorts of fun woodworking accessories like all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. Until next time, take care as always. You know, I got a Harbor Freight ad in the mail yesterday. Right on the top it said Giant Liquidation Sale. I'm hoping to get a green one before they're sold out.